Australia is now the top destination in the world for Chinese property buyers, despite huge fees and taxes for foreign buyers.
People from the Chinese real estate market have been making big moves in the real estate market lately, especially with an eye on Australia. Not only did they do it quickly, but they were also very focused and careful. Big Chinese real estate companies like Poly, Greenland, R&F, Wanda, and Country Garden began buying up important sites in Australia about 10 years ago. They bought things like malls and office places. When they bought Circular Quay in Sydney, which is a very nice spot, it was a big deal. They had huge plans for it as well. Being in the middle of all this chaos was Mark Weisel, who used to sell business property. It appears that today, things are rapidly changing. So why exactly are Chinese property developers fleeing Australia? Let's have a look in this video. Interestingly, Chinese builders made an amazing $8 billion from these homes between 2009 and 2016. Things got tough back at home though, and they had to start selling off their homes. One of their buildings was sold to a different Chinese developer in 2018. Then it was brought back by Lend-Lease and Mitsubishi. Greenland bought a house in Erskineville, Sydney in 2022 and sold it for a whopping $350 million. Similarly, Poly dropped 3 big projects in Sydney and Melbourne, and Country Garden began selling off parts of its Windermere estate and Wilton Greens project. Some experts, such as Louis Christopher from SQM Research, believe that these sales may lead to fewer homes being built, especially the tall apartment buildings that these Chinese builders were so good at. This is where things get interesting. There was a stop in the growth of the Chinese home market, which had been going strong for almost 20 years. The government limited the amount of money that builders could borrow. The housing market was thrown into chaos, the worst it has been since the late 1990s. Betty Wang, who knows a lot about Chinese economy, said it was like a property bubble popping. Country Garden said they lost $11 billion in 6 months and might not even be able to pay their bills. It's crazy that Evergrande's share value dropped by 99%. It owes more money than any other company in the world. Joseph Lai from Ox Capital said that these big developers, who were short on cash, thought that selling their assets in places where they could get a good price was a good way to get out of their problems. Before we take a deeper dive into the situation, here's a quick reminder that if you enjoy our content, don't forget to show us your support by subscribing to the channel. I'll give you a few seconds for that. Anyway, the Australian branch of Country Garden, Risland, recently told ABC that their clients' money is safe and sound in a trust fund. Is that good news? Well, Chinese companies are still committed to their projects down under, even though there have been some problems along the way. This industry is very important to China because it makes up more than a quarter of its income. This is especially true now that they are trying to get back on their feet after the pandemic. The amount of money people need to put down as a deposit has been lowered to make it easier for them to buy homes in big towns. But some smart people who study the business also think that interest rates should be lowered even more. Australia is hoping that things will get better with China, especially since the Prime Minister is going to Beijing soon. Everyone is hoping that this will help solve some of the trade problems they have been having. Big thinker at the Lowy Institute for East Asia, Richard McGregor, was just at this high-level meeting between Australia and China. He has a lot of interesting things to say about how things are changing, and he didn't shy away from shedding light on these developments. So, there is a lot of talk in Beijing about the coming of Australia Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. China really wants to make more friends, as per Richard McGregor of the Lowy Institute, and China has its own money problems and has trouble getting along with countries like the US, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. China clearly didn't look good on the world stage when they had a bad relationship with Australia, so they want to work things out. As Minister Richard McGregor explained the situation, the reporter asked what the Prime Minister Scott Morrison thought, which was that making peace with China might look weak. It was then reported that while the tone of the talk is softer now, the policies are pretty much the same as when they were when Morrison was in charge. Things like AUKUS and naval training are a part of this. He did say, though, that some people who are wary of China are worried about this new method. This is not a good time for companies that ship wine and lobsters and still have to deal with Chinese trade blocks. McGregor is sure, though, that trade problems shouldn't have too much of an effect on Australia's foreign policy. Why is that? Well, it's because China really can't live without iron ore, which is why they didn't stop buying it. They might hurt their own economy by cutting off iron ore. We're not sure when they'll lift the bans on meat, wine, and seafood from Australia, though. What the World Trade Organization does will affect wine, and it's not clear what will happen with lobster exports. Around the Lunar New Year in early 2024, things might start to get better. McGregor further explained that he thinks China is mostly to blame for President Xi Jinping's recent move to get along better with Australia. The better mood is mostly because China has decided to be nice. This means that Australia needs to be very smart about how they deal with this relationship. Also, he says that big changes between the two countries won't happen unless Xi says so. This is clear from the meetings he has had and will have with Albanese soon. He also talks about why he thought Xi wasn't at the G20 and East Asia summits. He thinks that it might not have been much to do with Australia. Xi might not be thinking about Australia as much as he is thinking about countries in the global south. He might even be ignoring India. In the midst of its military expansion and moves around the world, China is indeed putting a lot of effort into making sure its people have enough food. That's also something they want, but it's harder for them to achieve because they need to import a lot of things, especially important foods like soybeans. Australia has been sending a lot of wheat to China lately. One reason for this is that Ukraine's exports got messed up. China wants to depend less on goods from the US, Australia, and Canada, so it's putting a lot of money into farms in places like Brazil and Argentina. They're also putting in a lot of effort to improve how they grow their own food. McGregor noticed that the tone has already changed with Australia's new government when he talked about how ties between China and Australia might change after Prime Minister Albanese's visit. Things that happen to Chinese Australians who get into trouble in China are very important to keep an eye on. If things don't get better for them a few months after the visit, it might not look good for the diplomatic attempts. It remains clear that Australia should be careful about how the US sees this trip, because they are always watching how other countries deal with China in answer to a question about the risks of the trip. The United States should be careful around China while they talk again. Among the different words being used, China was reportedly talking about a reset, and Australia was talking more about stabilization. This proves Australia doesn't want things to return to the way they were. In this case, it would be certain to be very important to find the right balance in negotiation. For similar content, don't forget to check out some of the other videos on your screen.